Hello, this is Mars. I'm recording this video for Feminist Theory. So if you didn't watch my last one, you should probably watch at least the first part of that so you know what I'm talking about. On that note, this week's piece was, excuse me while I find, it was from a book called Gender Trouble, and the piece was Feminism and the Subversion of Identity, and it was by Judith Butler. And it focused a lot on gender as a lens through which we view ourselves, which was really interesting, and how that ability to know ourselves affects our relationship to ourselves and other people, and what we choose to be important, what we accept, and our values, and different things like that. And my main beef with it was that it was very academic and overly so, and I felt like it really walled off a lot of people from being able to relate to it and understand it, which is never really a good thing. But her last sentence, or her last paragraph, really kind of, she does a good job of distilling everything that she talks about in about two sentences that aren't quite as academically heavy as the rest of the piece, and that sentence is: genders can be neither true nor false, neither real nor apparent, neither original nor derived. As credible barriers of those attributes, however, genders can also be rendered thoroughly and radically incredible. And that, the last bit, she doesn't focus a whole lot on what she means by gender being incredible, but she does talk a lot about how society makes out gender to be this or the other, and even within the spectrum of gender, which is not always seen to be a spectrum, which is another thing she kind of touches on, you have this whole, well, this is what a real, this man, woman, whatever is, and then everything else is just the other. And it's, I think my interest in it lies not so much in the way we use gender to know ourselves, because while I don't particularly identify as cisgendered, I'm not, it doesn't have a huge bearing on how I live my life. So personally, that the whole idea of gender, whether perceived or you know, what I identify as, it's not something that's a huge deal to me, and it's not something that really affects the way I live my life, or the clothes I buy, or what I wear, or who I interact with, or who my friends are. It has no bearing on my sexuality. So I mean, like, there's no real reason for me to find too much to do with gender itself. I do find it interesting, but I think tangentially related, what I find most interesting is how perception of gender can wall off people from participating in certain interests. And that, along those lines, this is not terribly related to the actual piece, but this is just kind of where my mind went with the piece, so bear with me if you can. The reason I think of this is because lately I've been hanging out with a group of friends who are mostly guys, and we do the average college thing and stay up until forever in the morning talking about everything and anything, and a lot of times, because I am in women's studies, they poke fun at it, and then I'm like, well, what do you think about this? And we end up having really long conversations, and it's pretty cool. But at the end of these really long conversations, you know, we had a really awesome one about masculinity and perceived, you know, masculinity and power and different things like that, and it was really interesting to hear from a guy's perspective, because in women's studies we have a lot of women talking about what they think about masculinity, and we don't have a lot of men coming in saying, no, this is how we experience masculinity. You know, in general, most of my women's studies classes, well, of the three that I have taken or am taking, they've been, at least the students have been all women. So you don't get a chance to really look outside of that bubble, but I think it's an important part of women's studies and of feminist theory, is that you do that. And you can't do that if someone's perception of their gender keeps them from participating in that. And so that's kind of where I went with this piece, or when I was thinking as I was reading through it, more about how gender becomes a wall as opposed to a way in which to express oneself and to experience life, although it is that. At least in relation to feminism, it does seem to either feel like, oh, we should automatically be connected, you know, oh, you're a woman, so you should automatically care about women's studies, or you should care about feminism, or oh, you're a guy, so it doesn't pertain to you. Neither of which is true. I mean, for some women, that's just not their concern, and that is perfectly fine. But then again, there are those guys who would be interested in that, and interested in participating, contributing to this community, but don't because of the way we bill it. And I think that's something that I would like to hear talked about more in class personally about, and I know we don't have guys, really, aside from the professor, in which to do that, but I think it's a very important part because you can't just focus, like, gender doesn't exist on an island. It exists in multiplicity of the spectrum. I mean, even like sexual identities, like, you know, whether you're quote unquote male or female, those aren't the only options. We don't talk about those other options, and it's a bit frustrating because those things are just as important, and they inform our understanding of ourselves, really. And if we look, and she kind of talks about this as well, as if you understand yourself by seeing what other people are and saying what you are and you aren't. And it's just really important, I think, that we do more of that, and something that I've been seeing is lacking. It's been a lot of white women talking about white women problems, and as interesting as that is on occasion, it gets old pretty fast. So yeah, that's essentially, and that's really like convoluted and doesn't really arrive at a point, but it's just what I kind of got out of it, mostly. I really would like to talk more about, at least in class, and I know we had a piece in the past that would have worked really well for talking about it, but we didn't get the chance to work on it because I was teaching that day and I chose a different piece, which I'm kind of sad I chose a different piece now because, like, the other piece kind of interested me more. But the whole idea of femininity and masculinity, and not just like, oh, everything that's good is in the masculinity bubble, and then everything that's not good is other, and that's the femininity bubble. And I mean, I think it's much more complicated than that, and I would much rather like to hear experiences and hear other things, because when I was having this conversation with my friends, my guy friends, about masculinity and what it means to feel masculine, what it means to be a man's man, different things like that, what came out of it was a lot of like pressure. And it's funny because a lot of times you get in this women's studies bubble and you talk about, oh, there's so much pressure on women's bodies, and there's so much pressure on women from the media to be thin, or to be this, or to be that, or to be docile, or to be small, and that is true, but that doesn't exist without a flip side. It doesn't exist in a vacuum, and that flip side, understanding that flip side can only serve to help understand the way women are taught to act and to be. So it was a very interesting conversation for me, at least, and I still remember a lot of that, and I would love to have more conversations like that. It really is a pity that more guys don't take women's studies, because I think that it would just be really awesome, and there would be a lot of good conversations to come out of it. So that's pretty much it. I know it doesn't really have a conclusion. Those are just my rambling thoughts on this particular piece. So yeah, if anyone who actually sees this has any comments, especially anyone who has any more thoughts to bounce off me, like maybe you think that women's studies is actually doing a very good job of including the male experience, or you agree with me and you think that they're not doing a very good job, and you think that the focus should be more on like gender and social constructs and power and manipulation and stuff like that, like, then leave that as well. I'll take anything. So yeah,